For decades, the explanation for China's economic rise has followed a familiar set of headlines: unfair trade, currency manipulation, and stolen technology. But if we look at 40 years of factories, jobs, and infrastructure, the story looks different. It raises the question of whether the West lost its edge by walking away from the specific industrial foundations that made it powerful. On the other side of the world, China did not invent a new method of growth. They chose to execute the specific strategies of development that Western nations had started to abandon. To understand the shift in global power, we have to look past the political rhetoric and examine the physical realities of the last 40 years. In the 1980s, the United States was a manufacturing giant. 20 million Americans worked in physical production, and cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh were built around the stability and benefits of a factory life. By the late 20th century, the corporate focus shifted. Companies began prioritizing faster returns and lower costs over the long-term work of innovation. Relocating production to Mexico or China offered an immediate path to higher profits. Over time, supply chains stretched across oceans, and manufacturing became something outsourced rather than something built at home. A closing factory takes the knowledge and skills built over generations. It removes the local network of suppliers and the ability to produce goods without relying on an external partner. This graph shows the result: a manufacturing workforce that has dropped from 20 million in the 1980s to roughly 12.3 million today. While those industrial jobs disappeared, a larger share of economic value came from banking, asset management, and software platforms. The West transitioned its economy to one optimized for capturing value through financial transactions rather than physical production. In the early 2000s, China was still viewed as the world's factory for low-end goods: textiles, toys, and basic electronics. Instead of staying at the low end, China moved up the value chain by building infrastructure on a globally unmatched scale. Today, they have more high-speed rail than the rest of the world combined. This chart demonstrates the concept of economic speed. Efficient transportation networks compress the time it takes for a concept to become a physical product. While Western nations focused on service and finance education, China aggressively scaled its engineering graduates, who now number in the millions every year. That focus has resulted in a clear physical outcome. China now dominates the production of steel, ships, batteries, and solar panels. By treating manufacturing as the primary engine of productivity growth, Asian economies built a structural advantage over service-heavy Western economies. The current gap is visible in these numbers. China produces over 30% of global manufacturing output, while the United States has shrunk to roughly 15%. In the electric vehicle market, companies like BYD can now outperform Western competitors in both scale and production speed. This shift was the result of long-term planning, state-driven industrial policy, and a focus on export competitiveness. This strategy of infrastructure investment and infant industry protection is exactly how the United States developed into a superpower in the 19th and early 20th century. America built its capacity by protecting local factories and scaling domestic production behind industrial barriers before opening fully to global competition. East Asia did not invent a miracle. They applied the same historical methods of development that the West used, then discarded. After assuming for years that China's growth would eventually slow or collapse, Western policy has shifted toward frustration and protectionism. While tariffs can raise costs for competitors, they do not restore the lost supply chains or the industrial ecosystems that took decades to build elsewhere. What would it take for the West to actually rebuild its own productive base? It would require moving away from a focus on short-term returns to fund the rebuilding of heavy infrastructure, energy systems, and transport networks. It would also require an educational shift back toward engineering, manufacturing, and skilled trades, rather than purely digital or financial services. Above all, it requires patience. Industrial strength does not emerge in a single election cycle. It takes decades of compounding effort. Global economic power follows the unglamorous and historically proven process of long-term preparation. One side optimized for immediate financial returns, the other optimized for industrial depth. Now the world is adjusting to that gap.